My name is Nitanis. Nitanis is a Cree name, it means my daughter. My ancestry comes from the northern Alberta by the boreal forest. We're the woodland Cree. My mother's side, Fort McMurray First Nations, is where they live on that area, if you guys know where that is. And my father is from the Athabasca area, and he's Métis stand plant. But my mother married when I was really young, and we moved up to Prince Rupert, where I was raised, and I lived most of my life. And he's a Tsimshian Gitsan from Hazelton in the Killer Whale clan, and his father was from Hartley Bay and the Eagle clan. So I grew up in the Northwest Coast, and I was given a lot of foods growing up. And some of the foods that we don't have here, but herring eggs was really big, seaweed and clams and all the fish that you can imagine. And because we lived in town, it would be brought to us because my family were from the community. They would bring the food, and we'd have big feasts at my grandmother's house. So I didn't really know how it got there or what was the process to getting it there. I just knew that I grew up eating these foods. And then I moved down to Vancouver when I was younger, and I met my partner here, he's Luciano. He's from a house at Kismat and Cloquet here, and John Nasafak. Yeah.
Hey, John.
So he brought me here about 20 years ago, and so I've been connected, and I find that Port Alberni and the West Coast is very similar to the West Coast in northern BC where I grew up. And it's also a very industry town, so with logging, pulp mills, and fishing industry. So there's a lot of similarities with the displacement in the rural areas to in town, and so there's a lot of people there that they're living off those industries. And yeah, sometimes I don't know how I'm gonna start a talk, and I've been learning about foods. It's been quite a few years now, and I think I started with the Vancouver Island Coastal Communities Indigenous Foods Network, really digging into the foods here and sharing and teaching and learning. And that was in the beginning, if anybody's heard of Vicafun, we used to have gatherings all over Vancouver Island. And I became the network development coordinator at the time, and I really felt like I didn't have my role as a network developer really needed to dive into the foods. I didn't feel like I had enough knowledge about foods, because I ate the food, but I didn't know really everything, the process, the preserving, the how to harvest and hunt and all those things. And I felt if I was going to be, part of this network as a developer, I wanted to. So what we did in 2010 is we went on an Indigenous diet. And we met at the BC Food Systems Gathering. There was 3 of us women that were outside the workshops, and was like, can you imagine if we could live on an Indigenous diet? Well, what would that entail? What are some of the things? So we made these little perimeters of what we can and cannot do and what would be acceptable. So things that would have been eaten before colonization and the introduced foods that we have today. So there would be no dairy, no wheat, no pork, no beef, no chicken, but we would have like grouse and other foods like that, and turkey. There was some, and so what else? But coffee was one of those things that was like, well, coffee's indigenous somewhere, it's all indigenous. And it's passed through indigenous hands, and they had it from their farm. This indigenous passed it to another hand. It's okay. And then I was like, well, how am I going to deal with cream? So I figured, well, I was nursing at the time, and I'd figured out because I had my own cream. And so we did it as a family. I think at that time, what really set the tone, though, was really somber, because my father had recently passed at that time. I was pregnant with my 7th child, and he was of diabetes, and his mother died of diabetes, and her mother died of diabetes. And so they were the first cases of diabetes actually in the Northwest Coast, when they didn't know that it was actually diet related. And my grandmother was the first one to bring the dialysis machine up to Prince Rupert. And, but it was everybody, it was just a given, you're gonna get diabetes, that's how you die. And yet we were still eating all these very traditional foods, but we were having it with fried bread and lots of these foods were celebratory foods that, and coming from people that may not have had enough of these foods, so we used it to celebrate. And even when my father was in the hospital, he still had a lot of those breads because his mother would make the bread and her mother would make this bread. And so they were literally dying from this bread, but it was made with love. So there was this connection between love and this bread. Cleon, they call it, fried bread. And you still see, if you go to like traditional foods, they'll bring out Bannock, and Bannock has become a traditional food. But it's actually just the symbol of colonialism. Because when they came, we got flour, lard, salt, and sugar. And they took means of leaving the reserve to hunt and harvest, and tried to disconnect our connection to those foods. Especially as a nomadic people, they were the people of the buffalo. So the wood buffalo were very abundant back in the day, and some of the history knows that they killed off all the buffaloes to make sure that they'd take a nomadic people and settle them into these reserves, and then put a basic fence around it and made it law that they couldn't leave, and unless they got permission from an Indian agent. That was for a good 50 years. So this food was then brought in as a means to sustain them. And so we took that bannock and we took that flour, sugar, water, and we made it into something that we owned as tradition today, that we call bannock. And we survived off of that. And but this bannock, again, it was an awakening for us as a family to witness my dad still coveting this bannock with this love that he wanted of his mother, who died of diabetes. And so when we started the Indigenous diet, it was like, if we don't do it, we're gonna die, kids. It was really intense, and the kids took it on, so some of they couldn't have sugar, so we were like, well, some substitutes we would use, but no sugar. And so my kids would come at the store and just like, is this Indigenous? This lollipop? It's not an Indigenous lollipop. So just more berries, and then really tasting what sweetness really tastes like, because we're so disconnected to our palates, right? And that was in 2010, and we could feel physically, spiritually, like all the holistic feelings you would get when we'd serve the food, because we knew where that food came from, how it was harvested, how much work was put in, how much love and care was brought into it. So the food that was brought to our table, I know a lot of that who are gardeners, but it was more of a connection with this land outside of our home. And then teaching my kids and sharing that food. So we did that for a few months, and we gained a lot of insight with our family. But it wasn't practical in the sense that we could actually continue to feed our large family with these foods, because we would have to quit our jobs. Because if you're going to get the berries, you can't wait until it's a weekend and so much time and drive out there to get these berries. The berries are ripe when they're ripe, and that was it. And all I wanted to do was pick berries, so it was really hard to pay the bills and the hydro and all of those things, and the gas to get you out there to have this foods available for our family. But it really took out the middleman, so when you picked the berries, you had it in your hand, and then you gave it directly to your children. And they would eat the berries, and you were like, those berries grew for us to eat them. And I think that was really profound for me, was that being in the berry bushes. And when we talk about like Indigenous food sovereignty, to me it's the story of the berries and the reciprocity that happens, that we were not disconnected from the land. We weren't someone that would come in and take. We were part of the land. We were part of the ecosystem. The ecosystem thrived with us being with them. And you think of the berries because they actually grow sweet and juicy and vibrant colors, so you see them and they want you to eat them. and they want you, and they grow wild, and they're so good for you. They have all these antioxidants, and like, what are they good for? I'm like, vitamin C and A and all that stuff. I'm like, it just tastes good. and I think you really feel good, so I can't break it down, you know, what are the things for it. But we took care of those berries. And we took care of those berries by singing. And the women were very connected to berries. And there's a lot of connection between our women's reproductive system and the berry leaves. And you know, that raspberry leaf and all these different leaves that are really good for women in their menopause or when they're menstruating. And so there's a definite true connection between berries and women. So the young women would come out with their older women, and they would sing these songs. And the songs would be passed down over generation and generation. And these were berry songs. And what it does when you're singing, you're actually giving life breath. And you're passing that when you're picking your berries. And the berries are beaming because of that. And they're giving you, again, the nourishment and life from that. And you took care of it. So by you rustling around, the way that they learned how to pick was also pruning of these berry bushes, because they would have to return again in the springtime and again reap the benefits of the berries that had given to them, and they would give back to the berries as well. And it was this reciprocity. It was like they gave and we gave. And it really, the berry picking like changed my life too, because I was, you know, came from northern Alberta. I was adopted into these community. I came to this community here on the coast, and it's really finding like who I am as a human being on the planet was underneath the salmonberry bushes. I was getting emotional when I talk about it. Yeah, so I'm reaching up, it's raining, and I'm picking these berries, and it just like, I'm meant to be here. This felt so right. I'm supposed to be picking these berries with you know, no other worries about what, because I'm feeding my kids and being in this place and time. And the berries appreciated it. And that's what really made me feel like we're not these horrible entities that just are like, you know, fumbling around. And like, we did have connection at one time. We all did. And it's just about finding that connection again. And through the berries, that changed. And because all I did want to do was pick berries, we did eventually quit our jobs and pick berries. So, and through the songs, there was because I'm always like, why did they do these things? Why are our elders and our ancestors? I can understand they did that, but why? What are some of the things? And here's the little toy I made for Kawi. It's salmonberry, and so our children, it's like there's no place for them to play. They got these play kitchens with a microwave and stuff like that, and you like turn on the tap, and so you get little donuts and bread and that. So I thought, well, I'd like them to play like they're playing. You know, they're gonna make some klapjes, and they're gonna make a little salmon barbecue on a fire or something. Make a little fire, or play with the bull kelp, and oh, these are roots and stuff, and they can pretend that they're eating, and they serve their little plate. So you know, they learn language that's connected to it. I'm gonna go back to the song. So when you're singing the song, you're out, and it's on a good day. That song also connects you to the berry plant. But then it connects you when when you have to do something really monotonous. You put that music on. You got to clean your house. You crank the tunes, and then it just kind of, you get in the groove and you just do it. So you have to do something monotonous. I'm like, oh, I get it. They're singing the song because it's really a lot of work, and then so you kind of get into the groove of it. So I'm like, that makes sense. And then I was thinking, oh, what's another thing that makes sense about these songs is I know where my daughter is over there. She's singing back, and we're keeping connection. And we're also going, hey bears, woohoo, we're here, we're picking berries. Hey bears, woohoo, we're picking berries. And so everybody kind of knows. So it was serving all these purposes with just this song. And then another thing was it's not entitlement, but it was kind of like this song would be passed down and passed down, that these women from a family of this song where it was created gave them the rights to that. And when they were married in the protocols, that when they went to the men's, they took their berry sites with them and their songs, and they gave them to their daughters. And so it was this knowing that it was passed down, that family owned, not owned, I guess that's not the right word, but we're in guardianship of these places, and they took it on them to take care of it. So they wouldn't go in and like weed and stuff like that, just made sure that they were taken care of, to take care of. And so as a family, 2010, the diet really changed. It really pushed us to gain the knowledge. What was indigenous and what was introduced was mind-blowing, because you look outside and you think, oh, because it's growing wild, and then it's like, but finding out a lot of the foods that were introduced, these different kinds of plants, and digging around and seeing what grew here, and then how they preserved it, because there wouldn't have been any fridges, and then there was this like idea about just eating fresh and then not using like a fridge. I found out the fridge was this place where condiments go to die. And then it's like, so that when you bring fresh foods and you put it in there, and then it just loses everything. And then what it takes to make a fridge, all the chemicals and everything and then for it to never really break down. And it's like this realization of the way that we live in this, this time, for all these conveniences were really, really, really messed up. And so we moved to Tofino. So I have some friends here that, and what year is that?
2011.
2011. So from Port Alberni. So yeah, we have a lot of children. And then we have some more now after that. So we have 8 children together, and we take care of our 3 nephews. So at home we have 10 kids. So my oldest is on his own. But when we moved to Tofino, we came here, and it got us closer to this idea of being on the land. And so it was a stepping stone. We lived here for a year and spent a lot of time here in this Eagle Lodge and getting to know everybody in our community, in the Cloquet community. And I think in about 14 years ago, there's this space out in Herbert's Inlet that used to be the Suture family went there. And there's a long history about that, but I won't get into it. But we reoccupied it in 2004. Yeah, and started to kind of clear some area, and we built a little cabin, and we would go to this place on the West Coast over the summer holidays. And the kids would always ask us, why can't we just stay? Why can't we just stay? And we're like, no, we gotta go work and do all this stuff. But no. And also it was like we didn't have the knowledge if we did anyway. Mm-hmm. So from 2010, learning about the foods, and it was really this learning. We were just diving headfirst into finding out everything we could. We spent a lot of time with elders, spent a lot of time in the bush, learning, how not to do some things, and how to properly do things, and experimenting. And at the same time, I was part of the network, the BC Foods Network, so we were getting a lot of knowledge passed on through these gatherings that we're having by knowledge keepers all over Vancouver Island. So with the Coast Salish and the Kwapakua and some of the Nitanis here. And at the same time, when we felt like we had enough enough knowledge that we could actually jump off into the grid, into the wild. We did that in 2011, so a year later, I guess. No, it's not a little bit more than that. 2012, something like that. Anyway, it's almost a while ago. And we took our kids and we quit our jobs and we picked berries and went harvesting, and we would go out and the kids would, go and harvest foods, and we tried to live as traditional as we could, or what we thought. And there was a lot of awesome experiences that we had, and adventurous, some scary stuff, and we survived. We were so like we could have died. But I think in that time we also gained appreciation that in order for us to completely do that, we were missing something, a big key piece to that reintegration into the land one, we took a lot of things that we call conveniences. We had a generator. Always the things that we relied on that came from the outside world were all the things that were always going wrong. The chainsaw broke, the boat capsized, the generator would go, and certain things like that. And then, so we would always have to find ourselves coming back in to get, and then get more groceries, because, and then I would can food, and because I didn't have a fridge or anything, I would can foods that we couldn't get out there, like bacon. So this is after we stopped doing the Indigenous diet, but so I'm like canned bacon and canned some sausages and stuff just for variety sometimes. But yeah, we lived out there for over a year and a half, and then I was pregnant. I got pregnant again, and during that time with our with our 8th child, and during that time we realized when the boat had capsized, and our oldest was 12 years old, and she was basically his right hand man, woman, whatever, that was doing a lot of the stuff. So we realized that you needed a community to be able to raise a family, to live and thrive, not just survive, but thrive. Mm-hmm. And it was a lot of hard work. And I was pregnant, so I couldn't really do most things, and all the kids were like under 12, so they were just little. And then he was out doing all this, and remember when the boat capsized and everything, it was really raining, the ocean had just beat him up so bad in that last month, and his back end went out, and that was another thing about being an octopus. You have to be in like an ancestor health, like it's a whole other superhero strength that they have, right? The abilities that they had, and we just like literally came out of here, and so yeah, we didn't have the physical strength to keep up with some of these things. And so he was like, we can't do it. We can't do this anymore. And it was just heartbreaking because because everybody's like rooting for us, like this is this great thing. Like we did all, we left everything. And so we have to go back in there. We have to start. We had enough because we literally gave everything away. Anything that was plugged in, we gave it away. We only left some of our clothes. I think brought some dressers, and that's it. We had, had gained a lot of stuff over the years. So I said, can't do it. And then it was this realization that we were coming back into the town. We didn't want to feel like, oh, well, we suck. We couldn't do it. We're not strong as our elders. There's a little feeling of that, like of our, pride. But one of the things we really, really realized was that we couldn't do it without the language. That language was an incredible key to how they lived. And because we were figuring things out by, second, third information, what elders who had grandparents that told them this, and so it was like, and then books, right? And so we had books, and then by personal experience. But there was pieces that were missing about how to truly understand the way that it all worked and how you could live out there. And then when we said that out loud to each other, that because right then we learned root words and this and that. We were doing interactive language DVDs. We were part of like doing some language revitalization in there, really simple stuff. And he's like, we have to learn the language. And then it was just like, I knew what that meant. That was going to be really big. That meant like everything that we're doing now had to be on hold, and we had to come back in. And the only place where you could really access a lot of the speakers was in Port Alberni because of the hospital there. And a lot of them, we have a fluency rate of like a 1%, and each one like goes almost within a month, and you have another speaker gone. And it sounds really, when I speak like that, I try not to, like that's, there's also speakers being made, but at the same time it was emergency. So we left everything, went back into Port Alberni, and just did language, which is very much the same of like, because there was no way you could do that. You couldn't just go to school and learn the language, that there would be somebody, like there was no capacity for the language at that time. So we had to learn it and then build curriculum and teaching methods that may work for us, and then pass it on. So we became the learner and teacher at the same time. So within the 4 or 5 years that we've been there, he's been become like a neutral linguist and teacher, and was able to have gain fluency. And so in that time, I have all these foods, and at the same time when you're learning, you're sharing and teaching. So I became a foods teacher, a traditional foods teacher. So by all these toys, and so a lot of different things, like for the Vancouver Island coastal communities, we made these cards, and on them it has a picture, and on the back there's some language, and then how to identify it. And then we also did one, the New Channel put together a seafood one from the Watlak fisheries, and it has the New Channel words on it, and then also the New Channel teachings around each of these aquatic resources. I don't like the word resources, but when I was asked to do this workshop, I find that I like to teach kids and teach people, but when I have these tables and I have food, they were like, oh, but what is it good for? Like, what will it do for me? Like, what are the the vitamin breakdowns? And I'm like, well, I'm not a nutritionist, and I'm not not a health practitioner, and I just love food. And so and then I started to feel really protective of some of the knowledge that was being shared, and because you can't just go out there. And I think I did one talk. I literally came out of the bush and had gumboots, and I went to a traditional foods gathering and did a talk about us and our story and our family. And then at the end of it, I'm like, but don't go out there. Don't go out there and don't pick the food. Because there's not enough spaces that are untouched. And sometimes we go in there, and I would feel like how we went out to the land, we went in our haste, actually created a lot of damage in that space by bringing our boat out there, by bringing these things that we had been left out there, by our ignorance and our fumbling to try to do something which seems noble, but at the same time we had created a mess in our ignorance, not knowing. And so when I left again, it's kind of that understanding that we still have to go through a process of decolonization, I guess is the word for it. But there's a lot of grounding work to go before we could go back into those spaces and understand that that everything is connected. Like they say, Hishokuk Sawik, everything's interconnected, everything is one. And we look at the foods and the medicine, and that is as being alive, and having the respect to give back what you take, and how can they thrive again by us taking, because we always take, we know how to take very easily, but it's really hard to give back and figure out what does that plant need, how is that plant going to survive. And then as soon as I would learn about a food, I'd fall in love with this food, and I'd fall in love with this plant, and anywhere, when I learned how to identify, I'm like, oh my God, there's that plant. And I would watch it over the seasons and how it grew, and what kind of food came out of it, what kind of flower it had, how in the springtime, and I'd just be enamored by this food, or this food medicine, this plant, and then just dive into, harvesting it in different ways that I would eat it, prepare it, and preserve it, and then once I'd done that, then I became really protective of it. It's so I then had established a relationship with this plant, and so when I established a relationship, I'd always go and visit the place where I'd go and harvest from, and then sometimes I'd go back and he'd be gone. He'd be completely gone. Somebody paved over it or something, and I would just be in this perpetual state of mourning, because it was always always happening. I see a food, fall in love, go and protect it, and then I turn around and it's gone. And then now we have something that's called climate change, right? Mm-hmm. So that's impacting a lot of things. And then the logging, obviously, and then even more and more, the impact of tourism, what that's having on the ecosystem here. It's really, really devastating by our recreational use, not knowing we're coming here to enjoy beauty for our needs. And we look out there so we can enjoy the sunset over there, and not realizing in our ignorance that we're causing this imbalance, and for how far we had to come to get to this place. And sometimes we forget that. Well, Tofino, you guys are lucky because like, you're so beautiful, right? That you live in this beautiful space, but people forget where they're from to appreciate the beauty that where they're from and where they're at. And they're always wanting to go somewhere exotic. And that's the problem that we have today, is this lust for something exotic and different. So I've found love and learned about where we are here in this place, on this planet, and I felt a connection, and I wanted to share that, and I want to share that with my kids. And so we understand, when we consume something, that it's going to go. Your garbage doesn't just disappear, doesn't go into thin air. It goes back into the land, and so there's so much that is impacting our foods, and by development and constant development, encroachment of development. So then you're on the front lines and you're trying to stop it, and but people need jobs, so you're always like, and then you have like the fish farming industry and how that's impacting our waters and our salmon. Yet I have 3 nephews that work at the fish farm that I love very much, and so it's this constant, it's complicated, but it's not at the same time. And so again, when they phoned me and said, "Oh, can you do it for?" I'm like, "What are you gonna call it?" I was like, "I don't know." I'm basically like a food storyteller, so I can tell stories I can pick up. And sometimes when I would have young kids and stuff, and I wouldn't know what I was going to talk about, and then I'd just pick up a food and tell a story about it, and then it could be a personal story that I learned about it. And so these are some of the things that I packaged up, and I was really adamant that I'm like, I'm not gonna do the talk and how to. It's not gonna be a how to harvest, because it's a lot of the times, and my friend Giselle we're really in a place where protection. We need to be talking about protection, and then establishing relationships with our foods, and with the ancestors that were here before, and the language around some of the foods, and the understanding that they had is very profound and incredibly insightful, that they spent thousands and thousands of years of crafting this life on the West Coast. And so when we were learning the language, we would find the root words of each plant, and we had an understanding of how they viewed it. And then it's like piecing this puzzle together. Every word was like really exciting to have an understanding that, like there's one that's called the kosh mot.
Oh God, Buttercup.
Yeah.
Oh,
Kosh mot, yeah. So I'm just learning about that. But it's the killing plant. So kosh is like kosh. So the package is to kill. And so it's interesting. So the buttercup in it says the plant that kills, and some of the other different plants is like it's the way that they harvest it, right? It was a pinching plant, and that's the thimbleberry. So the root of that is to pick, because when you pick it, it literally squishes. So what they would do is just take it off the plant and just squish it right down on the leaf, and then sun dry it. And that's how we harvest it. So we like to harvest and then preserve the foods. So and in a dried method, so that we can have it, forever.
Could you tell us the story of the yarrow?
Of the yarrow? The yarrow's interesting. The yarrow taught me something, and I don't know if they can. Let me pass this around. You said the blossom.
It's a yellow flower.
No, it's white. It's a white flower. So the yarrow is a really strong medicine. And it's really fragrant, and the Crees would use it for putting it on their body for mosquitoes. Have you ever been to the boreal forest? There's lots of mosquitoes. So they would use that especially for a mosquito repellent. They would put it on, and also hunters would use it too to hide their scent when they would go hunting. So it was like a practical, so it was a tool. And it was also used for cuts and stuff like that. There's a lot of medicinal uses of it. But I was looking for it, and I was really wanting to find yarrow in Port Alberni. Couldn't find it. Couldn't find it anywhere. And so I would look around, and I would go walking around trying to find where it would grow most optimally, and I couldn't find any of it. There's a lot that grow here in the boreal forest and stuff. And I remember I was at the hospital, and a friend's mother was passing at that time. And so just before that, we knew we would go out and we would harvest some and some cedar boughs. And we went behind the hospital in Port Alberni and walked into the trail there and got some cedar boughs. And when I looked around, and I could see yarrow everywhere. And it was all in the circle that completely surrounded the hospital. And then I was like, to me, it was this understanding that I got was like, they want us to heal. When there's sick people, they'll grow. And when I seen that, I looked and it was almost like when you find it, then you start seeing it. And at my father-in-law, he was really sick, and he's toward his later stages of life, but he was really sick. It grew right outside his window. And I was like, oh, that's really, it was interesting. And I started looking at and I was like, I wonder if you were to put a pot of dirt, and you put some inside in there, and you leave it outside and see what flies in there, what we'll seed and what we'll take if you put intention in it. So I started, I really was getting the understanding that the intelligence, and that plants want us to heal. Plants want us to have connection, like wild connection, not ones that we just grow. And because there's an egotistical thing when as a gardener or grower, like I did this. You know what I mean? Like I only say that because I cannot grow nothing. I have a plant that I've been just killing slowly for years, and then every time it just wants to die, I'm like, oh yeah, water. It's horrible. So it's just showing me I have no ability to domesticate any plants. This is not a yin yang, so it's horrible. I'd like to I've done some little bit of gardening, but I think there is a piece of that where you're taking, and that's not to say that the ancestors didn't do that. They did. They cultivated. There's a lot of root gardens and clan gardens, and there was an intelligent about cultivating, and so choosing the best of the roots to have in their community, and there was a lot of work that was done, and innovation and technology, indigenous technology that was used. But I also seen how it grew wild, and I started to really look around and pay attention what grew outside certain people's houses. And then I'm like, oh, there's somebody here that probably has an addiction problem. Because this is really a wild alfalfa. It's really interesting because what it does is it replenishes your depleted minerals and especially from things that you take, that you would have, that depletes your nutrients. And so it grew all over certain places on the reserve. I'm like, that makes sense.
No killing plants though.
Huh?
No killing plants, spot.
No killing plants. And that was another teaching too, is the buttercup. And there's, especially the buttercup, because there's no use for it. It's this plant that comes in as a nuisance, and it's, right, get rid of it. And then it's like, well, sometimes plants aren't for you. They don't have a use for you, but it has a use for something else. And there's teachings and some oral stories that we heard in the channel about the mosquito, and it's a pretty awesome story that I don't feel confident enough to share yet. But basically that everything has a connection. And the mosquitoes might not be good for you, but there is an animal, they eat the mosquitoes, and there's this everything is connected, everything is one. And without the mosquito, we don't know what would happen, right? And they're trying to mess with that too. But, what was I talking about? Oh, so the Gyros, for me, that was the first kind of time that I seen that. And it made me realize that they do want us to be connected, because it's for their benefit. If we're connected, we're not going to fuck it up. We're going to take care of it. We're going to love it, and we're going to, protect it for everything that we have, as if they're a relation to us. And so when sometimes people come to the table and want to know what things are good for, I was like, or do I sell teas and stuff like that? And I have lots of teas, and I could trade, but I'd rather show you. And then that way you have a relationship with that. And if you are just, if I'm harvesting more then, and I'm harvesting more because somebody else needs it, but they don't have a connection to that. And the whole time I think herbal medicines and teas are being discounted because they say, they don't work as good. And I know I'm talking probably to you guys already know this, but if I was in another room and they're like, oh, herbal medicine doesn't work as well. And I think it's because there's a connection that's lost if you're just going to a herb store and buying it in a little package that says it was, wild crafted, even still. And because plants are intelligent and they got multiple personality traits. Because if you look at a book, it's like good for stomach and all this, and then a million other kinds of things down in the book. It's very anecdotal, this is going to fix this and that and this and this and it does this. But I think just like human beings, we're good at, I don't know, what am I good at? I'm good at that story. And I'm also good at, what else am I good at? But I'm just kidding.
Raising children.
But I mean, we have all these different gifts, right? And I think just like plants, they have a lot of gifts. And I think if you have the personality, sometimes you could meet another person and you just clash, even though you, on paper, it would seem like you guys would get along. But people just have these energies that just, I don't know why, this person just really bugs me. But I'm just saying, that's kind of like plants too. So if you have a relationship with it, and then you could ask what it is that you want. And then in that process of going out and being in the forest, sitting quietly, with, you're in a very meditative state, and you're also connecting to your body, going, I want to heal this piece of me. And then when you sit down, that's almost half healing in that recognition. If you were to just go, I need this to be healed, so I'm going to go and buy this. So just in that act of doing it is, and then once you find that plant, you're connected. Then you want to take care of that plant, and you have a relationship, and it will be back and forth, because again, they want us to heal. They want us to be connected. They want us to be, mindful once again, and take care of them.
Yeah, just a question. When you talk about this kind of connection between the humans and the plants we're picking, and how we take care even of wild growth, have you ever noticed a similar relationship between actually animals and plants? Like when you were out there, that you could see, just out of curiosity, if maybe there's a similar connection between animals and where they have the feeding grounds, and if there may be even an aspect of animals even caring for their feeding grounds as we humans have learned to do.
Oh yeah, totally. So just like the berries grow for us, for humans, for bears, for some of the birds, and there's a connection and relationship that the berries have, just as much as a squirrel has with nuts, and it'll keep growing, and that the animal, what it feeds on, even the slug, and the importance that the slug has in breaking down matter and decomposing it. There's a relationship that is also between the food source, and like we did with the buffalo. I think the relationship that humans had with the buffalo, we were connected. And then you think of the salmon for the coastal people. There's a deep connection. And I would be very similar with the ciquetin, the eagle, and the salmon, the bear and the salmon, because with that relationship with the eagle, having taken the salmon from the streams, carrying up into the high mountains and dropping some of the some of the bones and the leftovers, and that fed the old growth forest. And the bears fed, and the eagles fed the old growth forest with the salmon by taking them all the way up there and depositing after they had eaten it. And it's again this really, you know, just shook us out. Everything's interconnected in one. So, any other questions?
It's easy to be overwhelmed by the losses. And I wonder if you have any suggestions of little things that we can do like daily to make that connection with each other and with the planet, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're so we're not in a state of perpetual mourning and get overwhelmed that we're not able to get up because it's like it's too much. And I think when you're out and you're in the forest and you're just breathing air and the wind, and because that still exists, everything still exists regardless of what's happening, right? Like this planet is pretty powerful, and I found that as like water protector, right? You know, protect the water. We're gonna, you know, go out there and protect the water. And I was like, a friend had shared with me, and it's not that we're protecting the water, we're with the water. Like the water's like, you know, there's this, we are just a much a part of the elements out there. And when it's ferocious, we're ferocious, but we're with it. And so when the winds really blow and lets us know how, you know, insignificant sometimes we are, but you're like, oh yeah, they got this. Like, I'm not gonna, like, my petition's not gonna make a difference. And that's what if I sign this piece of paper, because I'm witness, like, fire, we've been witnessing it, right? And it really lets us know that this planet is, you know, it's doing what it has to. My mother comes from Fort McMurray First Nations, and so when they were on fire and everything. But I went back a year later, and not a year later, but the spring, and all of the birch trees were just like burnt, the ground was scorched, and the first things that grew was the fireweed. And the fireweed is an incredible plant. And there's the one plant where in the Gitxsan they have a clan named after the fireweed clan. And the way that a fireweed, it has like 70,000 little seeds that look like feathers. If you ever have, you get a harvest or you have a fireweed, don't leave it in your car when it has the little things, because next thing you know, what they do is they puff up and they look like feathers, and there's like everywhere, and it was like down almost. It's really incredible how much it is, and they'll float off. And but when they land in the ground, they could lay dormant for thousands of years, and it's the right temperature that is created on the top, boom, sets that back to life. And what they do in the fire, and the fireweed are connected with the land, is that when that fireweed grows, then it's building all of that nitrogen back into the soil. And it's like this super trauma plant. So when you're experiencing some like trauma or grief and something, the fireweed is that powerful plant. And like, just based on how it lives, it's really beautiful. And there's a lot of things if you eat it, and have it in tea, make jam, and especially for tea, it's really good plant. Yeah. That's a cool story. What time is it?
Yeah, I'm supposed to be the room monitor and have time, but I have no time to do that.
It's 1:24.
Oh, 6 more minutes? Okay. So I'm connected with a lot of different groups around the Indigenous Food Sovereignty Working Group, which is a group that's formed in, it's pretty much located in Vancouver, but we have an online website, and it's just having these conversations, basically at the food summits for Canada, you know, or the food guide. It's always like, oh yeah, there's Indigenous foods, but it's not like um, Indigenous food sovereignty is so different than just like food, because it's just land, land protected. It's just land, and so it's really hard to have those discussions because there's a lot of it's very political when you start talking about Indigenous food sovereignty, right? So these are some of the things that our friend Elise, she's down in Washington State, and they put together some programs and just, like food is our medicine. Like, so anytime we're eating our Indigenous foods that were grown and that we've had for time, our bodies and the makeup of our DNA is connected to these foods. So like you said, like how we're connected to it. Same with like if you were to take a bear out of its habitat and just start giving it Bannock, it's gonna change over time but it's DNA, and it was like somebody shared with me and they said, well, you don't teach a bear how to eat, a bear just knows what to eat and knows where to go and know that berries are the food and salmon are the food. And so they'll just naturally gravitate, just like any animal, to the foods. But human beings, we're so disconnected because of that disconnection, especially through colonialism, and like really the process of colonization that disconnected to our food. I heard a story about they had a day school, Mount Christie.
It was a residential school.
Residential school, where Kakawis was, around there, because it's not Kakawis anymore, but on the coast. And the kids used to go out, and they said they would take the little huisstoop. Huisstoop is a rock stooper that they would stuff it in their pockets, and then they would eat it, and they wouldn't know that that was a food that they were eating. And quite recently we're finding out, because of the residential school, that they were doing nutritional experiments with the children because they knew that they were underfeeding them. So they allowed doctors to come in and take their blood and to do data research on the children of residential schools. And Port Alberta was one of them. And a food historian discovered this a few years ago by going through some of the research, and then he realized that they were children that they had this data from. And then he did some more research, and he realized that a lot of the doctors that were putting together these research papers were going into these schools, and so they were deliberately knowing that they were being starved and given poor nutrition. So that's I don't know where I was going with that, but that's.
The children were eating this. They knew.
Yeah. So it's just like going back to our food. So food, anytime we're eating it, and that's it, is medicine. Because it definitely, you are feeding your spirit when we have our foods. And then also that we would eat with the seasons, and it's really, really bizarre now when we're going to the shop, when the market, and there's like strawberries, or any mangoes and pineapple. We're seeing more of that. Before, I remember like we would get all excited when we get mandarin oranges in wintertime, and that really showed that there was a change in the season, but it was this special delicacy. And it was funny when they brought oranges and apples, because there's apples aren't indigenous to North America. The only apple that we have is a crab apple. So I always say, like when you say, is American as apple pie, because they brought the apples here and created what we have now. But they would take the apples and the oranges and they would put it in a big vat and cook it with bullock grease. I thought that was really funny. So there's this documentary about how they were cooking, because they would eat berries and bullock grease. Everything would be eaten in bullock grease. And I was just imagining these oranges and apples and bullock grease. If you know what olekins are, they're like herring but smaller, really, really fatty oil. So tasting the seasons, like our bodies need to have those different seasonal foods. So we would be mostly eating protein, really dried foods during the winter time, and there were certain berries that would grow a little extended. We have cinnamoxis, and that is the evergreen huckleberry. And so they would make sure to eat some of these foods that would be and lots of teas in the wintertime. But eating with the seasons and the first shoots that would show up in the springtime also actually helped your digestive system, so to release all of that heavy protein and give you the energy that you needed in the beginning of the year. So your body was connected to the changes in the season, and it gave you the boost that you needed to do the work. And it also during the winter slowed you down and made you, so we're not supposed to be doing 9 to 5 Monday to Friday in the wintertime. We're supposed to be chilling in bed because we feel like we should be. Well, we should be. And that's what I tell the school. Anyways. So, tasting the season. Protect what you love. And that's, again, with the wild rose and some of the things that are precious. And, you know, there's, I just love the wild rose. Like, even when you take it, I know that the heart, you know, does not actually look like a heart, but it has that reference that each of these leaves has a heart petal, and it has these thorns, and it speaks to the word love in Nitanis is ya'uk, and ya'uk is also pain. So there's this like when you love something, you feel pain if you lose it. So, and then it bears this really beautiful fruit. And so there's a lot of teachings of medicine and protecting and falling in love and protect what you love. And having that relationship that I said. And then we have build strength, and we have the Eichmalt. Eichmalt is the stinging nettle. And there's some beautiful stories, oral teachings about the Eichmalt and how it helped and saved people, and that the plant came to them to give them the strength that they needed. And so the Eichmalt was used as very much like a tool, and it was a really strong medicine, and it was a really, really vibrant, really great food in all aspects. So that plant grows here in the coastal waters, and it's also really good for arthritis. And I was like, because we get a lot on the coast, right? A lot of elders have arthritis, and so it's always in these books that they would use it for arthritis, and they would put it on their bodies. And so anybody asks, what do you do for arthritis? I'm like, sting needle. I show you, just gotta sting yourself. And I was like, okay, they won't do it. So I was always really happy. I'm like, somebody's got to do it. Show me like it actually works, because I want to see somebody see if it works. But most people were too chicken. But I heard some stories that they did for maybe younger kids with juvenile arthritis, and that's what they did. They took their kid and put them in stinging nettle at 8. And she said never experienced it again. Yeah, and she speaks of that time that grandma done that. To be resilient, and that speaks with in this one about the fir tips, the trees, and just being able to recharge and be our best, because we do have to go out every day, and fight that really good fight that we're here. And water's life. It just speaks to that it is water's life. Apparently there's this Japanese scientist that said, it's alive. You may have seen that. Like, yeah. I'm just kidding. So I think I'm done, but if you want to come up and see some of the resources that have been made by friends of mine and some of the things that we've done. And I remember picking berries. John and I had this kind of berry tool, and we're like, well, like a bear claw. So he made this one. He's like, it's like a bear claw would pick berries. And then I had another one that actually, and it worked really excellent. I don't have it, but this one would get stuck in the branch, and then you're pulling it, and so it didn't really work. But I still have it out. It's like, because this show's just like really trying to figure things out and how to best, do a lot of the work that we had to, because we did have to feed our family. If we did have to feed our family, we'd have to figure out ways to do it. And there was a lot of ways that our ancestors would do it. And then we'd spend like 4 or 3 hours picking berries, and then we spent another 5, 6 picking the leaves out of the berries. And I remember like clogging a couple sinks with it, and then sometimes it would just like take so long. I really loved it at first. It was really so just picking the leaves out. It's kind of like a meditative thing, and then it became like a job, and I was like, I don't want to pick the berry, just eat the leaves, but I was reading a book, and the Nitanis, what they would do is they take a cedar plank and they would put it in water. And when I read this, and they would pour the berries with the water down the cedar plank, and all the leaves would get stuck in there.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, those are so good. Yeah, and but yeah, so, this is some soap I made. I just thought it was fun. And the toys and these cards. There's some other cards and some of the foods that I would bring for the kids to kind of to test out, and yeah. But thank you. I think
Awesome, thank you.
That's
Thank
it.
you.
Everybody come.